Joke, right? Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Carol Townsend. I work for MSU Extension, and I also staff the Revitalizing Neighborhoods Committee for United Growth of Kent County. And MSU Extension with United Growth partnered with the Grand Rapids Planning Department to do an educational project concerning the relatively new zoning code that was passed by the city in November of 2007. And we needed to do some citizen education because the zoning code is radically different from the previous one, and it really is dependent on citizens to help enforce it. This PowerPoint is one part of that educational project. We've been taking it out to different community meetings showing it. And on the back table, you'll see fresh off the press, new brochure, and we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that are in this brochure. We've got 2 more brochures coming, and we've done specific workshops on specific zoning topics. And this project is funded through a grant through Dyer Eyes Foundation. Now, the zoning code is very thick, so luckily for you, we're not covering everything today, but here's a list of some of the things that we're going to be going through. First of all, it's important to get an idea about this zoning code and some of its history because the context really impacted the development of the new zoning code. And so to really get started, we have to first talk a little bit about the master plan, which the city adopted in 2002. It's a very progressive master plan for this city, which hadn't had a new master plan since 1969. So it was very much out of date. The master plan is an official city document that spells out how the city imagines its future and how it wants to grow. Master plans are required by the state and are legally binding documents. Our new master plan emphasizes building vibrant, sustainable communities by focusing on things like buildings designed with pedestrians in mind as well as cars, buildings with high-quality appearances that mesh with the surroundings, and vibrant public spaces enjoyable by all. We knew that the master plan could not be fully implemented by the old zoning code, and you can, when we say old zoning code, we mean it was an old beat-up code with many, many amendments. The old zoning code did not allow for mixed-use buildings, did not put much emphasis on allowing neighborhoods to keep their unique characteristics, and they actually kind of encouraged urban sprawl growth. So in 2007, the city commission adopted a new zoning code that would be successful at carrying out the goals of the master plan. Now, this zoning code is very unique, and we're going to tell a few reasons why it is. It's a hybrid of form-based and traditional zoning. The way the traditional zoning, how we had been doing it for a half century or more, is where the uses are separated, where you have residential here, business here, industrial there, and you have to get in your car all the time. If you want to go to work, you've got to get in your car. If you want to go shopping, you've got to get in your car to go there, whatever. Form-based is trying to change some of that. So this new code is not centered solely on separating land uses. It distinguishes areas based on the design characteristics of a specific project or the neighborhood. Secondly, this code is unique in that all commercial districts allow for mixed uses, including residential uses. And the old code didn't allow that. So this is a real departure from the previous code. The third reason the zoning code is unique is that public participation was a significant element in its development, and as it was for the master plan. The zoning code is meant to implement the goals that this community set for itself in the master plan. So the zoning code is an implementation for the plan, the master plan. Finally, what might be the most unique element of this zoning code is its flexibility in allowing neighborhoods to maintain their uniqueness. This code does not pigeonhole all parts of the city into one size fits all. Rather, there are 3 types of neighborhoods, each with zone districts that reflect how that neighborhood has developed in the past and how it will continue to grow in the future. Oh, I forgot to put in these other points. Okay, so here are the 3 neighborhood classifications. Traditional neighborhoods, which is what we're going to focus on today, are neighborhoods that were constructed, the housing was constructed mostly before 1940, and it's generally referred to as the central city of Grand Rapids. But we have 2 other classifications too, mid-century neighborhoods and modern era neighborhoods. One of the most amazing things kind of that came out of the master planning process was that people really liked whatever neighborhood they lived in. So whether it was a traditional one or a modern one, which are really quite different, people really love that. And so the master plan said, we're not changing that. Wherever people, the neighborhood they're living in and they like, we want to keep it that way. But we want to have that variety. So we're focusing on traditional neighborhoods, and what would they look like? Well, there are several common characteristics that you'll find in almost all traditional neighborhoods. I've already mentioned that they're the oldest neighborhoods in Grand Rapids. They have the smaller lot sizes, which helps make them more dense than the other neighborhoods. That way their buildings are closer together and it's much easier to walk from place to place. These neighborhoods are typically centered on old streetcar lines, and now there might be a rapid bus line instead. The parking is either for the shops or the residents are hidden behind the buildings, either through alleys or specific lots, or they don't exist and you have to do on-street parking. Finally, you'll see that housing, stores, and shops and other uses are more mixed together in a traditional neighborhood than you would find in a more modern one. Excuse me. So to preserve the existing characteristics that we've just talked about, traditional neighborhoods have 6 zoning districts. And we're going to talk about the first 4 districts listed on your screen there, and give you a general idea of what they look like or what the characteristics are. We're not going to talk about the TNCC, the city center, because that's really downtown and they have their own set of regulations and whatever. You can talk to somebody specifically about that. The other zoning district, which is a really interesting one, is the TNTOD, the transit-oriented development. And hopefully we'll be hearing more and more about that as we go along. But right now it's too new and we just don't have many examples of that. So starting with residential zone districts, we've got 2 of them. And the first one, the low density residential, LDR, is designed to protect the quality of life in a single and 2-family neighborhood. There may be some higher density areas near transit zones, major streets, and business districts, but generally you'll see the low to medium density. Because of the traditional characteristics of a low-density neighborhood, like the quiet streets, uses are only permitted if they have a minimum impact on the quality of life in the neighborhood. Some of these allowed uses are permitted by right, meaning that no special approval is needed for that use to occur. This includes things like parks and community gardens, as well as home occupations. Uses that are permitted by right typically don't bring additional congestion and noise and other unwanted characteristics into a residential area. And so they're permitted automatically or by right. Other uses can be permitted, but they're called a special land use, which means that approval must be granted by the planning department for that use to occur in an LDR neighborhood. You might find, for example, a religious institution, school, or fire station in your neighborhood, but only after they were approved as a special land use. Some uses that are considered special land uses may be desirable in the case of a school or fire station, but concerns about traffic must be taken into consideration before they can be approved. So anything that would disrupt the character of that low-density neighborhood. The other residential zone in a traditional neighborhood is mixed density residential, which is MDR, and these areas are more flexible in the densities that are permitted than in LDR, which means that everything from low density residential to high density residential is allowed. So you could see an apartment building, a multifamily dwelling around the corner from a single family house. MDR areas may also function as a buffer between the quieter streets within the LDR zones and the bustling, busier streets found in a commercial area. Being a buffer also means that MDR areas can be transition zones where former commercial sites can be transformed into context-sensitive residential developments, and we're seeing more and more of these in Grand Rapids. Because MDR permits higher densities than LDR, allowed uses aren't as strictly regulated. This makes sense if you think about the neighborhood context. MDR areas aren't expected to be as quiet and peaceful as an LDR area. More pedestrian and vehicle traffic is expected. The streets within an MDR are more likely to be major streets with more traffic. In a neighborhood like this, a new fire station or a bed and breakfast will have less of an impact than in an LDR area. Therefore, while there are still some uses only permitted by special land use in an MDR, more are permitted by right. Now, we can go through this pretty quickly. There are what's called building elements that are required in traditional neighborhood residential areas. By building elements, we are referring to a set of required design standards that regulate building characteristics. Through these elements, we can ensure that building design will enhance and not detract from the neighborhood's characteristics. So what you're going to see are pictures illustrating the required elements. And first, we have the building line and setback. Buildings in residential areas must be set toward the front of the lot at a line called the required building line, the RBL. The formula for determining the RBL is spelled out in the zoning code, but basically what it amounts to is that all the buildings in a block are in a row. They're all about the same distance from the street or from the curb. Building orientation means that the building must be facing and parallel to the street. The primary entrance of the building must be on the front of the house and clearly defined. The door opening must be framed. Materials refer to the covering used on the exterior of the building. They must be horizontal in orientation and made of high-quality material, such as brick, stucco, whatever. Now, the transparency requirement for residential buildings is that 20% of the front of a dwelling unit must consist of doors or windows that permit a view to the street. This is the crime prevention, more eyes on the street kind of thing, as well as enhancing the streetscape. It's important to note that the planning department can permit minor deviations for all of these requirements. These minor deviations are called administrative departures and are not general waivers of the regulations, but rather they enable the planning director to be flexible with certain provisions of the zoning code. Now, I forgot to tell you that we're going to do a little pop quiz here. Pick up your pencil. No, we're going to do this orally. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, and then you're going to tell me what kind of neighborhood would you find these houses. So, our first one, would you find these houses in a residential, a traditional neighborhood, a modern, or mid-century? Traditional. Why would you say that?
Looks like they were built before 1940.
Very good. What else do you see in this picture that makes it traditional?
Front porches closer to the street.
Front porches closer to the street. On-street parking.
Smaller lots.
Smaller lots, absolutely. And would this be in a low-density residential zoning district or a mixed-density residential area? Do you think? Do you think they're one family, two family, 10 family? It's low density, right. Probably they were built as single-family houses. They might be cut up into 2 or 3 apartments. We hope not more than that. Okay, now let's see the second slide. Is this a tradition? We find this house in a traditional neighborhood? No. Why not?
Well, it looks new, more new.
That's correct. New construction.
Farther back from the street.
Right.
Off-street parking. Garages in the front.
Garages in the front.
Front of the structure.
Parking in the front, no sidewalks, whatever. Okay, and for our third example here, would you find this kind of housing in a traditional neighborhood? This is actually our trick question for,
You would, yes.
and actually you're correct. It's mixed density because you can see there are any number of apartments in these buildings, but there are some single family more. This is Reliant Street. After the ash trees have been cut down, you can see that it is a traditional neighborhood. Okay, now we've talked residential, and now we want to move on to commercial districts, or what most of us call neighborhood business districts, and we'll see what the new code has to say about them. The traditional business area, TBA, is the most common mixed-use zone that you'll see in traditional neighborhoods. Traditional business areas are designed to be neighborhood destinations so that you can pick up a gallon of milk, buy the kids an ice cream cone, meet your friends for a latte, or anything like that right within this business area. Not only are all of these uses permitted in a TBA, but you'll also find employment and residential opportunities right within the business area. Residential housing and offices are permitted on all upper levels of buildings within the TBA zone. The first floor is intended for retail, or they call more active use than residential. If the image of Main Street kind of comes to mind, that's really what the TBA is intended to be. An environment geared for pedestrians and those who use alternative modes of transit. Parking is hidden or on street. The buildings are close together and have entrances and lots of windows facing the sidewalks. There is a vibrancy and street life during the day, and we hope into the evening. Finally, TBA zones are opportunities for the density of an area to increase. Housing above ground floor retail can be more dense than what is permitted in LDR or MDR areas. The other mixed-use commercial zone is transitional city center, and TCC zone districts fall primarily near the city center. So this district also functions as a buffer between the high-density downtown area and the lower density surrounding neighborhoods. Because of this, TCC is able to be higher in density than other mixed-use commercial districts. TCC areas, the transitional city center areas, are generally characterized by large old warehouses. So if you think North Monroe, that's a good example, that can be rehabilitated into mixed uses. TCC areas are permitted to have almost identical uses to the traditional business area. However, they are able to accommodate slightly more intense uses than TBA zone districts, such as a clinic or a health club. Now, we're going to go through the building elements for mixed-use buildings, and you're going to see some similarity between these and what we did for the residential. So the first one, building orientation. Buildings are required to be parallel to the street. Expression line was a new term for me, and it might have been for you, but it essentially refers to a horizontal line that visually separates the first floor from the remainder of the building. And this isn't the best example, but it gives you an idea of what that expression line is. The line can be done with a change in the building materials or design. Its purpose is to enhance the pedestrian scale of the taller buildings. I think the expression line here is much better on some of these. You can really see it more clearly. Okay, because so many of the buildings in traditional neighborhoods have historical value, redevelopment cannot destroy or cover up existing architectural details. So the original door and window openings must be left unaltered if at all possible. For new buildings, there must be architectural variations every 30 feet to avoid being monotonous in appearance. Buildings within TBA and TCC districts must be 2 or 3 stories in height. Additional stories, however, may be permitted if the builder provides one of any of the following: urban open space, ground floor retail, and affordable housing. The zoning code specifies how many bonus stories will be allowed for providing these findings. I think it's a very progressive part of the code, that section is. 50% of the exterior walls must be high quality and durable materials and horizontal in orientation. And again, the materials should be brick or stucco, something of high quality. Buildings must have a clearly defined entrance every 60 feet along the frontage of a primary street. The primary entrance must be on the front of the building. If the building is right next to the sidewalk, then the doorway should be recessed. And then lastly, 60% of the walls facing the street must contain windows and doors to maintain the view from the sidewalk into the building, again for the crime prevention benefit. 30% of sidewalls must also be transparent. The upper floors have less strict requirements because that would be housing or some other uses. Now we're going to have another test. These tests just roll around so fast, don't they? Okay, I'm going to show you some business areas, and you tell me if they're a traditional business area or not. What about this one? Would you define this as a traditional business area? No. The reasons.
One story.
The what?
One story.
They're one story, correct. Parking is in front of the building instead of behind or on the street. Looks like a pedestrian would be killed pretty easily if walking around there. Okay. Next one, is this a traditional business area?
Definitely.
Most definitely. Midtown, to be exact. You see the buildings right on the sidewalk. See the expression line. All those kind, very pedestrian oriented. And then our third and last is, would this be found in a traditional business area?
Yes.
Why? The answer was yes. This is our trick question for this.
Well, the use of the materials, the brick,
Mm-hmm.
the orientation to the sidewalk and
Yeah.
the door straight out.
Right, the
not
building.
from the back, from the parking area.
That's right. The parking is hidden behind the building, very pedestrian oriented, on a transit line. Okay, good. Yeah, it's only one story, but that was built before the new zoning code went into effect, so it was grand.
Departures for one story if there are other structures nearby that are also one.
Okay, we were, I think it would be great if that could be a two-story, but anyway. Okay, we've got a couple of other zoning topics to cover very briefly. And the first one is signs. Everybody at City Hall loves issues regarding signs because they can be pretty ugly. But signs are regulated for numerous reasons with the goal of trying to find the balance between protecting neighborhood character and aesthetics without infringing on a company's need to advertise themselves or on constitutionally protected First Amendment rights. Signs are permitted within all zone districts, assuming that they blend in with the neighborhood and do not create unsafe conditions for vehicles or pedestrians. This could mean ensuring that a sign doesn't collapse onto the sidewalk or that a sign flashing lights blind drivers. Signs must not be visual clutter or destroy views of the environment. Finally, signs need to add to the neighborhood, helping to foster a sense of place by being a positive streetscape addition. Knowing if a sign violates the zoning code is pretty much common sense. Like a lot of the enforcement with the zoning code, if it just doesn't look quite right or really feel right, chances are there could be a violation. If it appears to be unsafe or out of context with the neighborhood, it's quite possible that it is a violation of the zoning code. And in those situations, you can report it to the city, and they will look into it. And whether it turns out it is or isn't a violation, there's no harm in reporting your concerns. Some signs may be non-conforming, but they're still legal, and that's through the process of grandfathering in signs that were legal under the old code but no longer are. And as long as they're well maintained, they are permitted under the code, although they'd like to see those all disappear at some point. Then Article 9 contains a variety of use regulations that are specific to certain industries, facilities, types of activities. This includes things like outdoor activities, parking structures, regulated uses, temporary structures, bars, and drive-ins or drive-throughs. We had a language problem, not drive-in movie theaters, but drive-through restaurants. Basically, anything that will impact the quality of life in a neighborhood that isn't already addressed in the zoning code. What's important to know is that for a lot of these things, additional approval is required before that use can occur. Take, for example, a bar. The use regulations say if the bar needs a liquor license, then it's automatically going to require additional approval as a special use. Finally, just a brief note for those of you who remember the old zoning code and regulated uses for people like me. The regulated use doesn't apply to other kinds of things like adult entertainment or whatever. That's the only thing it does apply to. It does not apply to bars and secondhand stores or whatever right now. Okay, now we want to spend some time talking about how you as citizens can get involved in helping to enforce the zoning code. It's an important process that we hope you can get a handle on. This zoning code is really complaint-based. Depends on complaints to have most of its enforcement, and that requires everyday citizens to actively participate. City doesn't really have a staff person going around looking for violations, although they will go out if something is reported to them. What this means for you is that you need to have a good understanding first of the zoning code. So you're taking a good step today by being here and getting this overview. And then you also need to know how the zoning process works so that you can effectively engage in the process. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that process. The first is the application and review process. That's required for every project. We're going to start by talking about the process for simpler projects and then move on to process for a little bit more complex ones. Now for the simple projects, the application and review process is fairly easy. The proper forms must be filled out by the developer, the builder, homeowner, whatever. For the planning department, and approval is based on a counter review. The counter reviews involve planning staff reviewing the plans for a specific project to ensure they comply with the zoning code. And this type of review is only available for specific projects such as new home construction, the addition of a deck, a swimming pool, whatever. And it's not available for more complicated projects. Now the application process again. For the more complex projects, there is a process that should be followed or the project risks being tabled and denied by the Planning Commission. The first step is a pre-application meeting, which is an informal, non-binding meeting between the developer of the project and a planning staff member. This meeting is meant to basically determine the type of review that the project will need to go through and to provide more information to the applicant about city policies and procedures. Next should come a neighborhood meeting, which is an important opportunity for neighborhood input, something that everybody'd want to be aware of. These meetings are not required necessarily, but the Planning Commission has been real good about saying if the developer hasn't had a neighborhood meeting, he needs to go back and do that. The meeting's purpose is to inform the occupants and owners of nearby properties about the potential project, address any questions or concerns, and work out any issues that arise. The goal is that by the time the project gets to the Planning Commission, the surrounding neighborhood is in support and really understands what's going on. Following a neighborhood meeting, the applicant turns in the documents required by the planning department so that it can be assigned for review. There we go. Okay, there are 5 possible types of review, and luckily we're not going to go through them all. We're just going to primarily talk about 2 of these, the site plan review and the planned redevelopment district. The processes for all the reviews are fairly similar anyway. Now, the site plan review is hands down the most important process to understand, mostly because all projects in all types of review undergo a site plan review. So what exactly is this? It's what the name pretty much implies. The plans for a particular site or project are reviewed to ensure that they conform with the zoning code. When an applicant applies for a site plan review, the project is initially looked at by the planning staff. The staff will then present the proposed project to the Planning Commission. A public hearing is not required. The planning director may request a public hearing if it's a controversial project, but does not have to. Now, with special land uses, remember we talked about those in the residential areas, the largest difference between that and the site plan review is that there are always extra criteria that must be met in the special land use because, again, we don't want to disturb the character and the quiet streets and whatever. The director review is the final decision that is made by the planning director instead of the planning commission, and that can be appealed. For this one, it might be easier to start with a brief explanation of a special kind of zone change, the Planned Redevelopment District, or PRD. It replaces the old PUD, if anybody remembers that, the Planned Unit Development, as well as the PRD that was in the old code, and there's still confusion over that when you say PRD. The requirements have changed for PRD. PRD now requires a special effort. An area-specific plan is needed first to ensure that there is neighborhood buy-in for the special district. Zone changes must be approved by the City Commission in addition to being reviewed by the Planning Commission, which was not required for the site plan. Reviews of special, for the site plan reviews or for special land uses. The Planning Commission holds a public hearing, and then they will make a recommendation to the City Commission on whether or not the proposal should be adopted. The City Commission may then choose to have a public meeting if it wishes, but it is not really required. And then finally, the decision made by the City Commission cannot be appealed. There are two types of amendments that can be made to the zoning code. The first is changing the text of the zoning code, which really is more of a staff function. And I think you've been getting good practice on this with a brand new code. It's already been revised once, and I believe a second revision is in the works. The other type of amendment that can be made is to the map portion of the zoning code, or more simply, rezoning. And I've got here an example of one neighborhood with the zoning designations on them. So this is, the yellow is the LDR, the low density residential. This color, rust or orange or whatever, is the medium density residential. So if somebody, the red is the traditional business area. And so if somebody wanted to say, let's extend the low density residential down farther, you would have to go for a zoning change, just as an example. Rezoning can be prompted by the landowner or the city and must serve a legitimate purpose. The zoning code specifies several requirements for the rezoning before it can occur, including things like being consistent with the master plan, surrounding properties, and site environmental characteristics. The process for making amendments to the zoning code is almost identical to the review processes that we already talked about, except there is a required public hearing at the Planning Commission level, but the City Commission does not have to have a public hearing. Okay, in addition to zoning code amendments, the code addresses how to make changes to the master plan. The master plan is required by all local units of government, and it needs to be updated every 5 years if necessary. And since Grand Rapids Master Plan was adopted in 2002, it was time for Grand Rapids to update their plan. And so the advisory committee, of which I serve on, decided that really the master plan didn't need to be changed, but we didn't have a lot of time to really talk about the green infrastructure within the city. And so the update is more of filling in on what we want for green infrastructure. So we're talking about things like trails, tree canopy, the parks, and a lot of conversation on how to better utilize the river that we have going right through downtown. So an amendment to the master plan must meet several criteria to be adopted. These include things like correction of errors or demonstrated community need, and are ultimately designed to ensure that the master plan will be consistent with the goals as they were expressed by the city's residents. Finally, area-specific plans are considered amendments to the master plan when they are adopted, making them official city policy. And we've really encouraged neighborhoods to undertake the development of area-specific plans, because the master plan gives kind of broad outline of how each neighborhood should maintain itself and redevelop. But the area-specific plan can get, as the name implies, much more specific. And the Midtown neighborhood, through their Brick Yacht project, was the first area-specific plan passed under the new master plan. We were able to have some MSU urban planning students work with Midtown in helping with their area-specific plan. And then last year we had some students helping Oakdale neighbors and Fuller Avenue neighbors with the Boston Square Kalamazoo area. They're in the process of developing an area-specific plan. It's a great tool that the master plan created that we've never had before, because the plans can be more detailed than the citywide plan, and they are added as an amendment to the city master plan, so it's like cast in concrete as much as you can. So when developers or whatever come into a neighborhood, they have to pay attention to what the neighborhood stakeholders outlined as how they want to see things happen. So we are encouraging everybody to undertake an area-specific plan. Well, now we have kind of a test, and this is the final one, so you can relax after this. I'm going to read you a couple of scenarios, and then you tell me if you think this sounds okay or whatever. Okay, for the first one, your neighbor constructs a 10-foot fence of cardboard staple-gunned to wooden posts around his property. Now, how would you like that? How would you like to live next door to that? And do you think it might be in violation of the zoning code? I think it might be in violation of the zoning code, too. So you would want to be sure to call planning and ask what might be able to be done about that. Yes, yeah. You would need a fence permit to construct. Well, I don't know about something like that. No, any fence. Any fence you would need.
I'll stop.
Okay. Second, your other neighbor on the other side of you has a decorative sign that says the Joneses, but the words are all in neon orange and green. Would that be a zoning code violation?
I would say no.
No. You can't really legislate taste, but it depends on how big is the sign, where's it located, and all those good things. But just not agreeing with color would not be a good reason. And then a developer has purchased the vacant corner lot in your neighborhood commercial district and has proposed a McDonald's. It has a drive-through window, and the building will be set at the back of the lot. Do you think this might have any zoning implications?
If the nearby business district is a traditional business area, this would be an unlikely scenario that would get passed at a counter review. So there are zoning implications for citing the McDonald's building on said lot, and also it could be or could not be in violation of the what's the word I'm looking for? We went over this.
It could be in violation of calories, or no?
It could be in violation of calories. A variety of uses. It may not be something that's. It may need a special land use.
Yeah, drive-throughs are always one of the trigger points because of the noise and whatever that it can generate. And then, of course, being, as you said, in the back of the property is not in line with the other businesses probably. Some people have said, oh yeah, McDonald's, great, yeah, we'll take it. And there's more, a little bit more to it than that.
Of course, if the nearby business district is in the modern era portion of our city, then that may be the preferred site plan.
Right, right. So it can differ with the classification of the neighborhood. You're right. Okay, now to kind of wrap up, we'd like to leave you with this list of some things that you can do yourselves. You've already made progress on the first one to learn about the new zoning code. And you can check out the planning department's website. They really have quite a good website, and it has, this is in total, the zoning code is on the website, so if you've got insomnia some night, you can check that out. Or if there's a specific section that you can't remember all of the regulations and everything, so you can just go onto the website if you have a concern about signs or distance or whatever, and check it out that way. You can keep up with by participating in your neighborhood or business association. You have the most power and the greatest ability to influence decisions that affect your neighborhood when you organize together. Your neighborhood association should be getting monthly Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission agendas. They'll email them to you, but as a citizen, you can ask to have those emailed to you also. And the city does that free of charge as a service. Keep your ears and eyes open for new projects in your neighborhood. Go to Planning Commission meetings when you know something in your neighborhood is going to be on the agenda. These are things you can do that will make it easier to voice your opinion when a project comes along that you really love or you really hate. Watch for possible zoning violations as you roam around your neighborhood, and feel free to contact the planning department with your concerns. They actually do want to hear from you. And finally, one of the biggest things you can do that will directly impact your neighborhood is to prepare an area-specific plan. You notice we're really kind of pushing this for everybody to think about it, that the ASP enables residents and business owners to shape the future of their own neighborhood. When adopted, it does become city policy, which means that future builders and developers have no choice but to pay attention to it. This is the number at the city that